So please allow me to introduce our panelists for the day. So we have Professor David Tran from School of Art, Professor Brendan Glove from School of Social Ecology, and Professor Andrea Nicholas from the School of Biological Sciences, and finally Professor Hu-Ling Singh from the School of Physical Sciences. Let's give them a round of applause, and I will allow them to start sharing, introduce themselves. So Andrea, since you're here, why don't you give a little ideas about how you actually cope 2020, how was that experience like, and also let us know what kind of course you taught in last year.
So I teach in the School of Biological Sciences, and I oversee the human biology major, which is a pre-health major for students. And I also teach a bunch of non-major courses, which are quite large. But, all my classes were active before the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, we had all these activities in place, and we were just kind of looking for how do we transition this to a virtual environment.
Thank you. How about David? You want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yes, I'm Professor David Trend. I've been in the Department of Art for about 20 years, and I specialize in large courses. I'll always have throughout my teaching career, and so I handle a lot of the department's large GE offerings, which is to say that before the pandemic, these were classes of about 350 students, and in our department we don't have the capacity to have breakout discussion groups in separate rooms taught by TA. So my classes would be a combination of lectures and lots of in-class activities, even with 350 people. And prior to this, prior to the pandemic, I had no experience whatsoever with online instruction, except the negative impressions that I had from a job I had before coming to UCI as a community college dean, in which the very high non-completion rate on online courses made me think they were bad. With all this change in the past year. Anyway, that's me.
Well, thank you so much for being here. How about Brendan? Why don't you introduce yourself and let us know your teaching style before the pandemic, and what kind of prior experience you have in online teaching?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandon. It's wonderful to see a lot of familiar names, a lot of new names. It's wonderful to be here with all these great panelists from a diverse set of fields and approaches. I'm in the Department of Criminology, Law and Society in the School of Social Ecology. So as you can imagine, we deal with a lot of contemporary controversial topics. I teach a range of courses, many related to media influences on understandings of criminology and law, but also more standard stocks such as constitutional law, teaching a hate crimes course right now. And similar to our other panelists, my design model on the ground worked a lot in the active learning pavilion, was very much based on this notion of collaborative meaning making and student-centered voices. So the real confusion around, and still what we're all working through, right, is thinking about how best to translate that to the virtual space.
Thank you so much. Finally, Hu-Ling, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience?
Great, thank you. So my name is Hu-Ling Singh. I'm an associate professor in the physics department. In our school, I teach the so-called gateway courses, which are the introductory physics courses for students that just came into UCI. And typically these are large class settings, around 100 to 400 students. So prior to the pandemic, I had zero experience in remote learning, remote teaching, and all of a sudden I had to make the transition. But the good thing is I had a little bit of time to prepare for it because I wasn't teaching that quarter. And also the summer give me a lot of time to actually think about how to actually use Canvas space, and Zoom technology to actually transform the classroom for the special pandemic situation.
Well, thank you so much for all of you being here and share about your success experience. So let's get started with our panel question. So that's reflecting on March 2020, when the school suddenly decided to shut down. Can you talk about that experience? What thought came to your mind? What action did you do to manage that situation? What kind of challenges and surprises did you experience during that period? And what did you do to make things work? So anybody want to get started?
I think I'm up next. Not that I have any great wisdom, because probably like most of us, I was confused and scared. Because we didn't know what to expect. And so beginning to prepare for spring, my initial worry was, as I mentioned before, I teach these large courses of 350 students, and I worried about all the paper that would be handled by the TAs and myself, because we do lots of little in-class things and anyway, so I moved quickly to automate that. But then as it became apparent that we were going to close, I opted to go asynchronous and begin recording all my lectures, because I was under the impression then, as I still am actually, that Zoom isn't that effective for large numbers of students. And the biggest thing that happened when things got started, and it's actually happening again this spring, is I still haven't gotten used to the silence that ensues in the online environment. Particularly now, I'm teaching a class in creativity of 900 students. And after the first week of a few little emails, the only way I can check to make sure anything's happening is to go look at the grades and see that they're being populated. But my point is that the silence made me kind of anxious. And so I started to send emails to the entire class, just little informational emails. A couple of times a week, I'd say, hey, your survey is due today, and oh, your discussion is due today. And I thought that I was, it was a function of my anxiety, and that I was babying them, and that they would think I was silly. And it wasn't until the midterm feedback that I learned that kind of consistent presence and communication is one of the essential elements in making that thing I feared, the non-completion rate, not happen, in keeping the students connected and sutured into the course.
Anyone wants to share about your experience when suddenly school decided to shut down?
Wonderful. I'll continue along David's point, because I think that he really hit the nail on the head in terms of thinking about what communication was going to look like, and that awkward feeling around silence. I still believe we need an embedded, horrible 90s laugh track that we can just hit when everyone's not responding to our dad jokes or anything else, right? So I know I thought a lot about that, and communication patterns, and also communication through our materials. David and I were chatting because we both teach media related courses, and I was teaching a media effects class at the time to get students to think about how media representations impact understandings of legal and justice topics. And so much of the media and the content was content that I had gotten access to be able to stream and share with them in class. So it was this real 180 in thinking about, of course, accessibility in a lot of ways, but specifically related to media and technology and how to respond to that. And it's now been a full year in teaching the course again. And so thinking about that and how to communicate, of course, in terms of general logistics of the course, but also substance of the material and everything along those lines, which I imagine we all have thought about a lot, including our audience members. So thank you for sharing that, David.
How about Andrea? I know you have a really interest design of your courses. Can you talk about your experience right once school decided to shut down last year?
Yeah, and I'm looking at Maria's question in the chat also. And communication, like David was saying, and Brandon also with the students, was so important right then, because I think we were all so scared that kind of like grades went out the window. I ripped up my spring syllabus. I rewrote a whole new course to try to kind of adapt it to the neuroscience of what was going on in the brain when we're dealing with fear and sadness and isolation. And I felt so like I have to do something. And one of the ways that I communicate with my students is I set up messenger chat, which is what they're all on anyway. They're all messaging each other through chat. And so we have a big course chat. And I think that really opened it up for both in the classroom and outside the classroom, where people were sharing things because so much was going on and getting up-to-date information. And then when all Black Lives Matter and the protests started, I mean, that was just kind of an amazing sharing process that carried over into the course.
Okay, yeah, I say we all kind of went through a very interesting year. And I'm curious about Hu-Ling, what did you do to handle the stress? How did you teach when suddenly you had to move this course remotely?
Right. So there are a couple of things. So I work with my colleague, Susanna, and also DTI fellows to actually convert our these gateway classes, moving all the contents digitally onto Canvas. So everything is streamlined. Particularly, we have those quizzes, discussion problems, and everything is not, you don't hand out papers, everything is on Canvas. So that streamline everything. So makes everything simple for the TAs and also for the students. So it lowers the stresses of those who work for us and also who receive the education. And that's really a great thing that I was able to do in the summer, and together with my colleagues and the DTI fellows. And the second thing I think is very important for me is that I feel that I want the live interaction with the students. So I kept the live lectures. I record them for those who need asynchronous learning. I encourage everyone to use the Piazza, another function features in Canvas embedded in there already. So they can post both logistic questions, physics questions, or anything that they want over there. So the instructors, TA, and peers can respond to this to them immediately, whoever see those messages first and know the information about it.
So thank you so much. I bet you all went through a very interesting year last year. And the reason why you are invited to join this panel is because, you know, we at DTI receive a lot of thank you messages from your students. And some of you are nominated for the 2021 Learning Experience Design and Online Teaching Award. And I'm just curious about, let me just kind of share my screen so you can get a chance to see the question. So I am curious about, you know, since you all receive many thank you messages and how good your course, you get good course evaluation from your students, you know, is there anything that, did you learn about your student that you didn't know before? Any surprises, challenges? You know, what kind of special approach did you implement to support your student in remote learning during the pandemic, especially, you know, it's really stressful time? And what was your motivation behind it to do these new initiatives? And what was your motivation? What was it effective, and why it is effective? And what kind of do you actually practice any inclusive teaching to help active communication? Can you just kind of share about your secrets in terms of how you teach this class in order to get so many thank you messages from your students?
Yeah, so one of the things is with the gateway courses for physics is that you have very large heterogeneity. You will find it's actually a bimodal distribution. And with the second most that have very wide distribution, right? So the challenge of teaching these classes is where do you aim, right? So for the online teaching, after you switch to Zoom, and me and my colleagues, what we found is one of the good thing about this is that there are students who need to interact with the instructors. And there are those who are at the other end that they actually don't need much interaction and they can choose whichever mode they want to be in. So basically, I offered the live lectures for those who need to interact with me. And those who are, they say, okay, they only need to like watch it offline, then they can opt in the other mode, whichever suits them better. And this is another way of thinking about it is I'm aiming more toward the second wider distributed the modes who actually really needs help from the instructors. And I think this is important for us who's teaching physical sciences, and that's particularly the case. Chemistry, physics, math, that kind of thing. And second thing that I realized is announcements or any small messages that you can send to them to encourage them to participate, to understand they are in difficulties. These things actually make psychological influence that help them to adjust to the situation. And it's just some underlying influence to them that even though material-wise it doesn't really make any difference, but psychologically it makes a huge difference. And I think that's some message you can deliver through live lectures, and that you can deliver through messages you send to them using whatever means, course announcement, email. I sometimes send individual emails to the students, and particularly those who are a little bit who fell behind. And through Canvas, you can actually check the activity. So you have analytics. You can check who have less or fewer access to Canvas, and you can actually send out message to them to remind them that they really need to keep up with the courses. That's just my 5 cents.
Let me follow up on that because I on Hulin's last point, because early on, Hulin, I started to use that both the total activity monitor for students and then the new analytics panel. And the only thing I want to point out is it's not completely accurate about what's going on at the student end, as I discovered. But what I did was, like you, I messaged every single student. I mean, I actually emailed every single student, and that was 10 to 20% I was seeing were falling below the normative curve. So I was sending like 75 personalized emails from me, not in any accusatory or negative. It was all about like, can we offer you support? Is everything okay? Just checking. And almost in every instance, I got back, particularly in that early pandemic phase, a really moving story of something being wrong, whether it was a connection, whether it was geographical displacement, whether it was caring for a family member, whether it was I have to work for money for my family. I mean, so that made a big difference. So that addresses the differentials. But now in terms of trying to be inclusive to everyone, I basically took a page out of the research done by the UCI School of Education about empowering student autonomy whenever possible. So that meant no set time for anything, 3 days to do any assignment, even tests could be doing it during a 24-hour period, no high value exams, because those have been proven to really stratify students in inequitable ways. So it was like midterm, 10%, replaced with small incremental things that we do week by week. No required Zooms. Again, ASUCI wrote that petition 6 months ago, asking the academic senate to not make people sign up for Zooms. And then finally, in case of my big courses, no added costs. I've made sure all the instructional materials were free, even the books. I make sure the library has them with an unlimited license. I mean, that's what I did.
How about Andrea? What did you do? What's your secret that made your students so appreciative of what you did?
I think what the students really liked that what we did is I had a team of LAs, of students who had taken the course the previous year and then came back, and we did a lot of interactive breakout room stuff, student-led things, and also student presentations where students were coming to class and presenting on Zoom. And I think they really appreciated that because they said it was the only class where they really get to spend, that a lot of them had, they really get to spend a lot of time with other students, interacting, socializing, working on things. And I always feel like students prefer looking at other students as opposed to me talking. So I try to get them to get, doing things where they're watching each other, because that's always fascinating, right? To watch your peers. And yeah, so that's what we did.
That's wonderful. And I know a lot of students really appreciate the active learning activities that you designed for your class. So that is also another success, I think, that you demonstrate. How about Brandon? I know you provide a really organized, clear Canvas site and try to guide your students' learning. What's your secret?
That's always the hope, right? I'm sure there's plenty of student emails that speak differently, right? But I know that a number of our wonderful panelists touched on it. So without being duplicative, I'd love to speak a little to what Andrea said in terms of a teaching team, in terms of the space of learning assistants and who else is present in your class. Because going back to my emphasis on collaborative meaning making, we really speak about democratization of voices and how do we get different voices involved in collaborating and speaking. And so the first kickoff of what we do, these are all, I structure these in different asynchronous ways. We do some of them live, some of them through Zoom, but I know we have a number of individuals from different fields, so speak to it differently. But what we always kick off with, as noted, since we're often dealing with contemporary controversial topics, for example, I'm teaching a hate crimes course right now. So as you can imagine, positives from a pedagogical perspective of we really being able to use our world as an experiential learning lab, and of course, negatives from the human experience. But the first activity of what we really do and collaborate around is an identity activity where all the students are invited through this structured digital space that we set up through Google Docs to think about the various identities that they bring to the class and why they'll necessarily feel differently perhaps about the material, or someone in their community will, just based off of their lived experience or some identity that they want to actually share with us in that space. And what I've actually found and discovered is that students are often willing to disclose through technology and through these devices and feel a level of comfort with it through communication that they didn't necessarily in the classroom. And so when we're thinking about inclusionary practices, I think, of course, that speaks to all of the different pedagogical approaches that we've thought about in terms of assignments and assessments, but also substantively thinking about how we can center their voice in whatever we're in, whether that is their more strictly like demographic speaking voice, or whether that's a voice that comes from experiential diversity or cognitive diversity or any other space.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'm just curious for our panelists. Throughout this 1 year remote teaching experience, did you learn anything new about your students that you didn't know before?
Unintentional, right? But I guess it's a good segue in terms of, student disclosure, student interaction. I think there's been a lot of testament to just communication patterns and learning about different communication patterns. But I think I was really hesitant to do some of the active learning that we had done in the classroom together, because it felt so human and so dependent on their willingness to share. And I was like, oh, they're never going to want to share this in a virtual space, whether that's on Zoom or through Google Docs or through an online quiz. But because of the nature that by and large, most of them are of the generation from, and I often joke and say we're the same generation, but I know that I'm not, and I see it in the way that they're willing very quickly, day one in the Google Doc or in the Discord chat or somewhere to share and communicate in different ways. And they just are very open to different types of communication patterns. So that's something that I definitely learned. And I also very much learned how meaningful mistakes are, because I know that we all can have difficulties, right, with making mistakes in the classroom or thinking about failure and responding to it. And I know we've learned that on the ground as well, but I've definitely seen in the unlearning around, oh, a mistake was made in the recording, so let's re-record it, or let's, somehow try to do, going back to like different styles of communication, that thinking that the presentation needed to look a certain way. They've really gravitated towards the mistakes. When you maybe hear my dog snoring right now, right? So like snoring or like making appearances or anything along those lines that I used to really code as a mistake or something that shouldn't have been done, they've been so open to and have seen the humanity in it and have responded to it. And so that has been a wonderful learning experience, both pedagogically and just interpersonally.
I definitely hear that animal always works in remote learning. How about others? Do you have any secret?
Okay, I'm not going to grab my cat again, but just to follow on what Brandon said, in terms of the democratizing of the class, the virtual classroom space, I know it's a simple thing, but I found, for me, I'd never used Canvas discussions, and now they're a required part of my course. And we've all had the experience in the classroom of some students who dominate a conversation and others who say nothing. And with anyway, the discussion boards brought all the voices out in the open, and I found the students would write extensively. And for me, and I'm telling you, the drawback of the large lecture hall is you don't get that individualized response. And I felt I could actually see the students learning. I could see them putting the ideas that we had, learned or talked about, but into practice, and synthesizing and elevating it to what are called higher learning objectives of abstract thinking and application. But the other thing I learned, which was in this, many students who came to me for office hours, was how crazy this was from the student perspective in terms of tracking all of their online courses. It hit me when one med student said, I'm taking 6 courses right now, and I'm up at 7 o'clock in the morning trying to figure out when all the Zooms are, all the deadlines are, all the other things are. And I just talked to a student like 2 days ago who showed me her spreadsheet, and it was like there had to be like 400 little blocks in her week that all of this online stuff made necessary. So anyway.
Yeah, students are also amazing, went through these challenges together with the professor. And another thing I want to point out, David, it's not about the discussion board that works and make your student to talk. It's the type of question you ask, really touch student, make them eager to join the discussion. So you want to share a little bit about your tips, how you make them talk in the discussion board, because I know a lot of the professors always complain, my students just give them bare minimal discussion in the discussion board. It never works. So how did you make your student talk so lively in the asynchronous setting?
I don't know. I understand what you're getting at, but I have to give them the credit. I just really do. I have found that UCI students are highly motivated. Of course, sometimes a little bit too worried about grades, and that's what we try and de-emphasize, so they can open up and inhabit the knowledge and explore within the course contents things that will help them. But I have no magic formula.
You just point a very key point, is trying to make students focus on learning instead of grades. And I bet you the question that you formulated or the structure you set up makes students feel more relaxed to well in sharing versus like, oh my God, this is 4 points.
Right.
So how about Andrea Huling? Did you learn anything special about your student during this year?
Well, I was just going to say for the chat, the way I get people, I consciously get people interacting in classes. Like for the first 2 classes, I only ask questions that are opinion questions, or questions anybody can answer. So you're not like asking, it's just like, so who has something that they're really afraid of?
Right.
Or so somebody told me a story about blah, blah, blah. And in that way, there's no pressure. You don't have to know anything, or you don't have to look stupid. It's just, I think that kind of gets that momentum, energy, taken care of.
You definitely point out a key point. I always talk to the faculty that a lot of the time, we realize this generation's learner is not afraid to speak out. The reason why they don't join the discussion board, maybe they don't feel that topic connects to them. So if you can rephrase your question a little bit, can reflect on your experience, have you ever done this before? Talk about your story, then share their story. Sometimes it will, prompt them to talk about more often in the discussion board. How about Hulin? Did you learn anything new about your student during this period?
Well, I think one of the things I learned is 90% of the students are silent in the classroom, because I teach in those 300 student big classrooms. You would find that only like less than a handful of students would raise their hands and ask questions in the in-person meetings. And however, in the Zoom setting, I do a couple of things. First, I respect their privacy. So I asked them to remove their profile photos. I asked them to keep only their nickname and the first letter of their last name. So they have no, very difficult for their peers to actually know who they are. So they wouldn't be, kind of say, just be fearful to ask, a question that make them look ignorant, right? So, and you can even do something a little bit further. You can only ask them to send messages to you so no other students can see it. So that will actually open up all kinds of questions to you that you wouldn't get in an in-person classroom. But of course, you will be bombarded with too many of them. So of course, you lay some ground rule for them. Only ask those that are really pressing. So when you have like 100 students, you can still move on. But I find that is something that was missing from the in-person teaching, particularly for the large classroom settings. If you have like 30 to 50 students, and that might be less of an issue. And second thing I realized is that a lot of them are working in an environment that actually, or learning from an environment in an environment that is not really favorable. Their siblings are constantly disrupting them. Their parents are disrupting them. So I want to echo what David said is having a period of time that they can choose their start time to actually do their assignment or quizzes. Give them 24 hours or even 48 hours. That's actually something I would keep when we all go back to the in-class room. So I will have the quiz open for the whole weekend. They can take it at any time.
That's great that you share. Inclusive teaching becomes such a vital component for remote teaching because everybody's under tremendous stress during this time. And I love our audience, Adrian Williams, saying that our panelists definitely show a high respect to the students and also being mindful about the challenges they're going. So providing a lot of flexibility definitely will make them feel much more relaxed and really focus on their learning instead of being interrupted by the stress that's happening in their environment. So I do have a final question for today's session, is that you probably already acquired a lot of lessons learned from last year. Some of them are surprisingly working well and some of them doesn't work well. So can you provide our audience a couple of your best practice recommendations and maybe do's and don'ts that what you would recommend your colleagues to be mindful of when they teach remote online in the future?
Wonderful. I think we've touched a lot on this, and just that notion that, again, it was a lot of unlearning for me about constant communication being okay, and really that there's no such thing as too much repetition. I was often concerned with this, like with things feeling like too pedantic or not needing to be repeated, but the multimodal approach of it, appearing in announcements, appearing in assignments, appearing in our different chat spaces, have really discovered time and again that constant communication is meaningful, even more so than just saying constant communication is okay. And also recognizing, going back to us thinking about learning assistants, teaching assistants, the team as a whole, what spaces of communication make most sense for your presence and which don't. I know that I've removed myself from certain ones, like we use Discord in certain ways, but then I'll let my learning assistants take the lead in moderating it because I have found that my presence perhaps kills the vibe because they're concerned that something is being moderated in a certain way. So I think that'd be a bit of a do and a don't, right? Is constant communication is great, but also realizing that there's support and way to structure the communication that doesn't always involve your direct presence.
Thank you so much, Brandon, for sharing. How about others? Any tips, tricks, or lesson learned you would like to provide to the audience that you experienced from last year?
I'll tell you something that didn't work, because I think that's oftentimes useful. One thing I found that didn't work is when I gave students like a problem and then sent them into breakout rooms to go work on it. And then when I'd pop into the breakout rooms, I'd see like maybe, 3 out of the 8 breakout rooms were doing that. And the other ones were just not communicating at all with each other. So, I'd pop in, I try to instigate. And I think that if you don't tag something onto those problems, like one of these groups is going to come back and present the answer to the class or something like that, a lot of times breakout rooms are very quiet.
Yeah.
So that was something that I learned.
Yeah, definitely. We have some lesson learned throughout the year that breakout room could be challenging. So designing those activities has to be appropriate instead of just try to have a breakout room to have a breakout room. Otherwise, it would be so painful. Another thing is that, because a lot of students, they don't share their cameras, that really create another layers of challenges for interactive discussion. So how about David and Hu-Ling, any lessons learned, tips and tricks you would like to share?
So I think that for me, I would say whether it's pre-recorded or live session, just try to be as passionate as you can. To increase the students' attention span, particularly they're watching a monitor. So I got feedback from students that they like that you make it more, be more passionate and also have a little bit of an interactive component in it. The second thing is that this is a lot of questions from my colleagues, particularly who are teaching physics, whether the students are cheating or not. So this is what I tell my colleagues and my TA is that in this pandemic, we're all in it together. Our goal is not to catch those that don't want to learn. Right. So our goal is to help those who want to learn.
Right.
And if you think about that, then all of the rest, are just noise, right? So just forget about that, right? So particularly for those who are had education in small liberal arts schools, right? So honor system is really the only one that they do their exams. So why, so I would trust all my students who are actually doing the right thing right way. And from my little monitor of how the score distribution goes within the 48-hour period of the exam, I found that distribution actually didn't change, which means there's not much of students who took it early and pass on the exam to another student. So give them some trust and think less about that.
Thank you so much, Hu-Ling.
Let me just commend Hu-Ling on that, because I couldn't have said it better, Hu-Ling. as I think I might have mentioned, now I'm teaching a class of 900 students. I have an army of teaching assistants. And in the talk I give them, it's very much what Hulian said. I said, look, our approach is to focus on the positives, is to focus on encouraging students to want this knowledge and explore this knowledge. And if any students are in this, just for the grade, or if they're going to cut some corners somewhere, we're not even going to deal with that, because we're about encouraging people. We're about giving knowledge to people and kind of preparing a table for them to then explore and enjoy. So thank you for that. And I will say, just kind of related to that, because I know some of my colleagues, I've just heard other professors focusing on those negative aspects of the learning experience. And they often come from, I hate to say this, but certain kinds of misperceptions and biases about students themselves. And for me, particularly being someone who's older, the importance of thinking about and making an effort to understand the student experience of what we're doing was transformative. And anyway.
Well, David, I'm so appreciative of what you share, because like I mentioned, really trying to understand from students' perspective and supporting where they need it is so crucial. And that is really the spirit of inclusive teaching. And thank you so much for doing that. So now we have about 13 minutes left. I'm going to open up the mic for the audience to ask questions. Before we do that, I also want to ask our chat moderator, Bo, is there any questions that in the chat that we can actually focus on answering first?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you. I actually learned a lot of things. Yeah, things to learn and things to unlearn during this pandemic. By the way, our panelists were multitasker. They were also answering some of the questions. But I could just bring it up a few questions if any other panelist wants to answer. Is that Karen asked, what thought planning and preparation did you make for students with disability? If you had any, is there anybody who wants to share that?
I know that David touched on this quite a bit in terms of pedagogical design, and then it was, again, doubled down on by a number of the wonderful panelists in thinking about amount of time allotted for assignments, thinking about low stakes assessments. And I think that adding to that a bit of what I did and what I'm constantly thinking about is multimedia, multimodal learning. So having access to resources that, again, when we use a text, there's an audio version that is available that they can download. Different, similarly, in terms of, I know we had a lot of great discussion around discussion boards, great discussion around, lack of a better word, right? No pun intended, but thinking about, and this is a definite shout out to Bo and Megan and all the support that came from DLI. One micro change that I made in my discussion boards that was not labor intensive was allowing them to submit audio files, and actually made for, they had the option of, they could submit either written files or audio files for the way that they were participating. And it made for a more inclusive experience, a better experience for our TAs as well, who were assessing so many of them. And I actually, of course, think I loved this question from Karen and hope that I was going to bring it back up if we didn't get a chance to refocus, but Bo and I were on the same page wonderfully, because I think there's such, of course, a wide range of disabilities to think about, both visible and non-visible disabilities. And I've been thinking a lot about, too, of the benefits for a lot of disabled individuals in this space and how we can maintain some of those going forward, such as or just different types of learners, the ability to stop and listen to lectures, again, in ways where I know I don't talk very slowly, and students have come back and said to me, oh, I listened to this 3 times or 4 times. So making sure that we continue to do that, the revamping of our syllabi to have headers that can be recognized with text reading, support technologies. And so all of these various components, I think it's important that we continue to have the conversations of not what we just made the changes to now, but how we're going to keep those changes going forward in terms of access and still being able to get access to the content, not needing to disclose their disability or anything along those lines, which I know has been beneficial in this space for a number of students. So thank you, Karen, for your question, and all of our wonderful panelists for what they've already shared about it.
How about other questions? Anyone, feel free to unmute your microphone right now. You can ask our panel with any questions that you have.
We have just the David just sent us a question. What technology did you wish, which is kind of fun to ask, wish you had while teaching remote?
I'll answer that because I don't know, maybe it exists and I just haven't heard of it. But you know, a lot of times in Zoom, someone's sharing a screen to show a presentation or a PowerPoint. And it would be great if you could quickly like swap screens so that they could keep their screen up, but someone else could go in, like the instructor, and, you know, like circle things or show things on their screen while they're doing their presentation. I don't know if there's anything like that. I kept thinking, oh man, I wish you could just like jump into other people's screens and show them stuff.
How about others? Any special tools that you actually, I know Huli mentioned about Piazza that you use. And I know one of the features that is really cool is that students are allowed to post anonymously, so they don't feel, and just like you said, that includes teaching, you know, no matter you teach it in the Zoom, you know, if they can actually just provide a nickname, I think that's a very good feature. Any others? How about ADA compliances? You know, I know this captioning and accessibility becomes a very big issue when we teach remotely ever than before. So how do you guys handle the accessibility issue when you teach remotely? Like, do you actually work on your script or any kind of thing to help students in terms of with the disabilities?
Most the requests I receive are students who needs longer time to complete assignment or the quizzes or tests. So what I did is that it's not just those students who need help, it's the environment, working from home or learning from home, that everyone needs a little bit more time because it's difficult to concentrate and focus on something. So I just increase the time for everyone. So that way is inclusive in a way that for everyone, whoever the situation that we don't know that they are in, that takes care of all of that.
Thank you so much. I also see the Chamber. Marla actually asked a question, like, do you find sending reminders through email was more effective than doing the same thing through Canvas announcements? Anyone? Like, how do you send out reminders? Do you do emails or do you send out Canvas announcement, or you don't send reminders at all? What do you do in terms of sending reminders?
I do it through both the Canvas reminder as well as the Piazza. You can send out announcements. I think they both do the same thing. And if you send out too many, it becomes a spam. So the student just don't read them. So of course, we don't want to send too many of them. Just the very important one, and send reminders at the right time. And I think that really helps the students.
Sure, thank you. How about Andrea? Andrea, how do you send out reminders?
My students are very well trained, and they actually send me the reminders, which is very useful. But I have them all on Messenger chat through, you know, it's the Facebook Messenger chat. I just put them all on a big chat, and then wherever I am, if I'm at the mall or I'm, you know, out and about, they got questions, I can answer them during their virtual exams. I can answer their questions really fast, and they can hit me up privately, you know, or on the full group chat. So that's been the most convenient for me.
That's great.
Yeah, it was, in general, I have, you know, so I send at least 2 a week, but they're always reminders about a specific thing, like something important. And and I maybe rightly or wrongly, I opted to use the group email as a kind of separate input into their mediascape, and that was my thinking. I don't know whether it's more effective or not, but again, they like it, so what can I say?
Okay. Anyone else? So last call, we have about 4 minutes left. So anybody who has any questions for our panelists, feel free to unmute your microphone and ask your questions, or put your question in the chat. I kind of scanned through the chat, and I think we kind of touched most of the questions. Let's give a round of applause for our 4 faculty panelists. They have really shared a great excellence in inclusive teaching tips to us, and that's really thank them with appreciation of how they're doing. And I hope that this session will give you some ideas about how to teach online remotely in the future.